Two women came before wise King Solomon, dragging between them a young man. "This young man agreed to marry my daughter," the first one said. "No, he agreed to marry my daughter," said the other. And so they haggled before the king until he called for silence. "Bring me my biggest sword," said Solomon, "and I shall hew the young man in half. Each of you shall receive a half." "Sounds good to me," said the first lady. But the other woman said, "Oh, sire, do not spill innocent blood. Let the other woman's daughter marry him." The wise king did not hesitate a moment. "This man must marry the first lady's daughter," he proclaimed. "But she was willing for you to cut him in two," exclaimed the king's court. "Indeed," said wise King Solomon, "that shows she is the true mother-in-law." A wife called her mom and said, "He fought with me again. I'm coming to stay with you." Her mother said, "No, dear, he must pay for his mistakes. I'm coming to stay with you." I heard of one preacher who exhorted his congregation at the offering time. He said, "Give as if you're giving to send your mother-in-law back home." One guy said, "I discovered my mother-in-law has weekly sessions with the devil himself on how to be even more vicious. I have no idea what kind of fees she is charging him." Two country gentlemen were chatting. One said, "Say, I noticed a lot of cars at your house on Saturday night. Were you having a party or something?" "No," responded the second man. "Tragically, last week one of my mules kicked my mother-in-law in the head and she died suddenly." "Oh, no," said the first man. "So she must have had a lot of friends. So were they at your house to pay their respects?" "No," said the second man. "Once news started to spread about the incident, men from all over the county started coming over asking if they could borrow my mule." So many mother-in-law jokes, so little time. I got along well with my mother-in-law. She was much easier on me than she was on her 4 children. I think it was because she thought there was still hope for them. When I went to Fort Myers to meet Yvonne's family for the first time, I was in college and had a full beard. Her mother was not impressed with me or my beard. She later asked Yvonne, "Where did you find him?" I think she assumed I had been living under a rock or in some dark alley in a cardboard box. My mother-in-law was a good person, a good Methodist. She did a lot of good for a lot of people. Her husband once told me, "I love her, and I have no doubt that she will go to heaven. And when she gets there, she'll start straightening everyone out." She was my mother-in-law for 36 and a half years. I loved her and appreciated her. Her own father had died suddenly at a young age, which made it difficult for her mother and the 3 daughters. My mother-in-law was highly intelligent and worked her way through Florida State College for Women and earned a degree in mathematics. She taught for many years. When her husband died, she asked me to conduct his funeral service. I also spoke at her son's memorial service after he died by suicide. She was there when I conducted her son-in-law's memorial service. When she passed, I was honored to conduct her funeral service, which is what she would have wanted had the Alzheimer's not destroyed her brain. Her life was not easy, and she suffered a great deal of grief, and she struggled with depression. Many of you have experienced grief. You know what it's like to be completely devastated by loss, to feel like your heart is fragmented into a million shards of broken glass. You think you'll never be whole again, never feel normal. Naomi had lost everything. She and her husband Elimelech took their 2 sons and left their home in Bethlehem, likely because a drought had caused crops to fail. There was no food. They left the security of their homeland and their hometown of Bethlehem, which ironically means house of bread. Then Elimelech died, leaving her to raise 2 sons as a single widow. It is a testament to Naomi's grit and determination and her love for her sons that she found two wonderful young women, Orpah and Ruth, for her sons to marry. Remember, all marriages were arranged by parents. Then her sons died before either daughter-in-law had a child. In that patriarchal culture, the daughters-in-law had left their families and become part of Naomi's family. Now they were all she had left, three widows grieving their shared losses. Naomi had to face the overwhelming grief of losing both of her sons on top of losing her husband. If you've experienced more than one loss, you know the recent loss resurrects the pain of earlier losses. Each one gets piled on the others. It's cumulative. When she grieved her son's deaths, Naomi was also grieving her husband's death all over again. One of the ways of coping with grief is to remember the good times. Did her mind go back to Bethlehem, to when her boys were small playing with their father? Did she remember scenes of them laughing and having a good time before the famine? As grief weighed her down, was she trying to cling to memories of happy times before they nearly starved, before they became refugees in Moab, before all her men died? As tears of sadness flowed from her shattered soul, did she remember the sound of her boys giggling in bed or the feel of her husband's embrace? Was that the reason she decided to go back to Bethlehem? Maybe if she went home, she'd find healing for her shattered heart. Or perhaps it was a more practical decision. As an elderly immigrant widow, Naomi had no hope of making a living in Moab. In that patriarchal world, widows had to rely on sons. If a widow had no sons, she had to turn to prostitution or sell herself as a slave. Naomi learned that the famine was over back home in Bethlehem, so she packed her little bag and told her daughters-in-law that she was going home. Both young women insisted on going to Bethlehem with her, but Naomi knew their chances of making it depended on them finding new husbands. That would be unlikely if they went with Naomi because of the bias in Judah against immigrants, especially immigrants from Moab. Naomi assumed they would have better chances getting married again in their own country. Orpah and Ruth would be better off going back to their mothers. Naomi had seen what good wives these young women were to her sons. She saw how they cared for her in her grief. They would make fine wives for other men. She believed in them. Having someone believe in you is so important. She told them she had confidence in them. We need to remember that when we are dealing with sons or daughters or anyone else for that matter. Let them know you believe in them. Naomi loved her daughters-in-law and wanted what was best for them. Staying in Moab would be in their best interest, but Orpah and Ruth decided to go with her. Why were these widows so committed to each other? As King Duncan points out, their love was forged in the furnace of grief. When someone you love suffers a loss with you, when you walk with that path of grief together, it can weld your souls together at the deepest level. Some of you are bound to family and friends because of the tragedies you have suffered together. Yes, the opposite can happen. Sometimes grief can shatter families and divide relationships. The last I read, 80% of couples who lose a child end up divorcing. Grief is tough, but love can be tempered and strengthened in the fire of loss. Ruth found it impossible to break away from Naomi because of that love. Naomi made it clear that there was no hope of these young women finding husbands with her. Finally, Orpah decided that her mother-in-law was right. It would be best for her to remain in her own country. Ruth, however, was committed to Naomi. Ruth loved Naomi deeply. It was in this context that Ruth spoke some of the most famous words in all of literature. "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. The story of Ruth and Naomi is what love is about. It is about loyalty and faithfulness and mutual devotion. Ruth's beautiful affirmation to Naomi reminds us of Jesus' statements, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will be with you always, even to the end of the ages. That's love, isn't it? It's not, I love you for what I can get from you or what you can do for me, or I'll love you as long as it's convenient. No, it's I'll love you no matter what. I'll always be there. Ruth was committed to her mother-in-law and the trauma of their grief, even when there was nothing for her to gain and everything for her to lose. So these two women set out for Bethlehem. Naomi's relatives greeted her fondly as they entered the city, but she told them, don't call me Naomi, which means sweet or pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, for my life has been a bitter one, she told them. The only food Naomi and Ruth had to eat was what was left in the farmer's fields after harvest. This system was known as gleaning. Farmers were not permitted to go over their fields a second time. Whatever was left from the first harvest was to remain there for the widows and the poor to collect. Apparently, Naomi was too frail to glean in the fields, so Ruth gleaned for both of them. Ruth's love for her mother-in-law demonstrated the kind of love that God has for us. It's a love that never quits, that never gives up, never fails, never runs out. It's love from the heart of God. I love you no matter what. I'll always be there for you. And you and I are recipients of that love. We hang crosses in our sanctuaries and around our necks to remind us of that love. Christ Jesus laid down his life for us, that we would come to know God's sacrificial love and learn to love one another. Over the past 2,000 years, people just like us have believed in that love and have passed that love on. Through plagues and famines, oftentimes under barbaric oppression, they did not let it go. There's a Hebrew word used for God's love for his people. It's a hard word to translate into English, chesed. It's a combination of ideas, loyalty, grace, and love. Chesed is not so much an emotion as an action. Ruth seems to embody that kind of love and reminds us that God's chesed, God's loyal love for us never ends, and that we can love each other that way. Robert Munch wrote the beautiful little children's book, Love You Forever. It begins, a mother held her newborn baby and slowly rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she held him, she sang, I love you forever, I like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. When the little boy was 2 and driving her crazy, every night she still rocked him and sang the song to him after he fell asleep. And still, when he was 9 years old and refused to take baths, and even when he was a strange-acting teenager, she continued to sing to him in his sleep as she rocked him. When the boy grew up to be a man, his mother would drive across town and hold him and rock him in his sleep, singing the same song. I love you forever, I like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. When she was too old and too sick to sing the song, her son took her in his arms and rocked her and sang the song to his mom, I love you forever, I like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. Then he went home and picked up his sleeping baby daughter, rocked her, and sang his mom's song to her. Ever since you were born, every night you slept, God has been singing that song to you. I love you forever, I like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. Thanks be to God for the loyal love the Lord has shown us and the loyal love to which God calls us. Amen.